now with a special meeting. And so yeah, is Randy coming?
He went the other way. He went, no.
He's not giving me reports.
Come on in, everybody.
Martin's here.
Come on in. Oh, the word spread. They got it. They're coming.
All right,
They're all in there having cheesecake.
we're going to convene the meeting. We're not going to do Pledge of Allegiance. Now, do I still do public comments?
Yeah.
All right, let's wait till more people get in here. What I'm going to do, we're going to, as soon as we think we're pretty much ready to go, we'll move into public comments, and then I'm going to turn the rest of the agenda over to Julie. I do have a commitment that the mayor has to attend, so. And she carries a heavy gavel. All right, is there anyone from the public wishing to address this body? Members of the public are invited to address the authority regarding any item that is not listed on the agenda. Please complete one of the speaker cards in advance of the meeting and hand it to a member of the staff. Seeing no one step up, I will now turn this over for you to help me out, Julie.
All righty. Be safe.
Oh, yeah.
All righty, we are moving into our regular agenda items. The first item on the agenda is the preliminary analysis results from the initial draft transportation expenditure plan performance assessment. Martin, you get to do the big show.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Is that going to take a picture? This is his last presentation.
Oh, is it?
Martin Engelman,
I guess it is.
Deputy Executive Director for Planning at CCTA for the near future. Matt Kelly is here. He's our Senior Transportation Planner, and he and I are going to present to you the performance analysis that we've done for the proposed 2020 TEP. So the last time we met, I talked about a number of things, and one of the things I talked about were the steps of the process we're going through. Is that thing animated? Push it again. So I went through all the steps, if you'll recall, of modeling, and it's a long process, but I'll zero in on what's circled here. We are at the point in time now where we've done all these other triangles, and we're now refining the model outputs, doing what's called post-processing, taking the outputs and refining them. And there's a very last step here that we're going to get to in October, which is to transition over to the economic study that Bay Area Council is doing and integrate the measurements that we're doing through the model with the economic study. So that's kind of where we are. We're nearing the end of the process, but we're not quite finished yet. And last time I told you all about the countywide model, but one thing I do want to tell you is regarding, it says population up there, households, jobs. All these things are going up through 2040, and they continue to go up through into 2055, the end of the measure. So that means more people, more households, more jobs, more travel. So when we show you these numbers, when Matt starts getting into these numbers, many times you'll see we're talking about it's still going to go up, but it won't go up as much as it would have if you had not done this TEP. So the TEP has positive impacts in lessening increases. Population increases, so we're now at 1.15 million, and we're going to continue to grow. The Bay Area is at 7.9 million people, and they're going to add more than a couple of million people to the population. So we are a growing community, and we're a growing Bay Area. The scenarios are the same as last time. We have 2020 existing conditions. and then we do 2040 with no TEP, and no TEP includes the regional transportation plan, everything that is funded through approved legislation and taxes and so forth. And then with the TEP includes the funding for from the half-cent sales tax. So still on the wall are existing condition projects. Anything that's under construction is considered to be in place by 2020. And then this no TEP scenario includes about $3 billion in projects that we can get from the RTP. And then if we approve the TEP, we can actually triple that. We can get over $10 billion in projects constructed. So all of the blue flags here are part of that expanded scope of projects that are possible with approval of the TEP. So that's some background now, and Matt Kelly is going to tell you about the results.
Excuse me, Martin, can you explain how you get to 10 billion? I think that's important. 10.5 billion.
Okay, sorry. So the RTP gives us $3.3 billion, and that's if we don't have a TEP. That's based on our existing measures, state revenues, regional revenues, federal dollars. And the TEP revenues now are forecast to go, if we go out to 2055, total TEP revenues are considered to be $3.6 billion. Okay? Only 43% of that is for projects. So out of the $3.6 billion, only about $1.5 billion is for projects, with 3-to-1 leveraging, and that's how much money we brought in with our project dollars that we put on the table. Every dollar we put on the table, we get $3 back. So with 3-to-1 leveraging, we're talking about $6.2 billion in new revenues for Contra Costa through this TEP approval for projects. And so combined, the 3.3 from the RTP and the 6.2 from the TEP is a $10 billion project investment.
Can we please add that to the presentations for all of the councils as we go forward with the numbers? Because you talked about 3-to-1 leveraging, but explaining it that way makes it more powerful. And I think that might be enough to swing some of the people who feel like they're paying everything over to understand that they're leveraging it.
Yes.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, Chair or Vice Chair and Commissioners. I believe this is what you've been waiting for, some actual numbers associated with the TEP. So we'll get into it. Okay. So as you know, the model can do certain things very well, namely capital projects. You put a widening in or a new HOV lane in, new transit route, and the model is very able to understand that and to load passengers, cars onto those new facilities. And that's, as Martin mentioned, 43% of the TEP. The other 57% of the TEP is not as modelable. So we've got to apply other techniques, and we call that post-processing, to try and quantify that 57%, which is very difficult and takes a lot of time and effort. Some of the things that we've done to this point is we've incorporated factors that MTC assumed in their Plan Bay Area 2050, the last RTP. That included implementation of new transportation demand management programs, increased car sharing around the region, and increased employer shuttles. We've also extended some of the TEP benefits to year 2055, namely vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. Those were the easiest we could model out to 2055, as our model does only go to 2040, as it is based on MTC's model. They are currently working to get their model to go to year 2050 for the next RTP, but right now it only goes to 2040. We've assumed a 31.3% increase in population through 2055. That's 361,000 folks here in Contra Costa County, new folks here in Contra Costa County. We've also assumed the clean air vehicle turnover, the turnover of the fleet, which is called the Pavley One Advanced Clean Cars program, and that adds to our greenhouse gas reductions through 2040. We've also applied it to 2055. And we used a tool that was developed as part of our latest update of our countywide bike and pedestrian plan that takes into account the investments in bike infrastructure and produces new demand, basically the number of new users who would use those new facilities. So we applied that tool to the model results. So first we're looking at year 2040, and we'll call this vehicle performance. These are what you experience when you're in your vehicle. The first metric we're looking at is daily vehicle hours of travel, the number of hours that you spend in your car going from point A to point B and point B to point C and so on and so forth throughout the day. We have focused kind of on the commute periods, but it's also applicable to other periods of the day. So, but you see most of your benefits during the commute when there is congestion. So if we were not to pass the TEP by year 2040, you would see a 32% increase in the amount of time it takes you to get from point A to point B. Without the TEP, you'll only see an 18% increase in that amount of time. Sorry, with the TEP. And the reason you're seeing increases for both is that growth in population. There's no getting around that growth in population. The region is growing, the county's growing, the mega region is growing all the way out to, Placer County, the foothills, the South Bay and beyond, Monterey. The mega region is growing like crazy, and there's no way we can stop that traffic from coming through our county. So the TEP will have a very important impact on reducing some of that congestion in our county. And speaking of congestion, the vehicle hours of delay, which does focus on congestion, the amount of time you're traveling less than 35 miles per hour on the freeways. Without the TEP, you're going to see an 85% increase in the amount of that congestion. With the TEP, it's tempered to 23%. Once again, taking into account that huge population growth that we're going to be experiencing over the next 20 to 35 years. So now we'll look at mode shift. This is where we're trying to get people out of their single occupant vehicle into other modes. So this is daily mode shift. This is looking at how people basically get to work. The drive-alones, once again, are going to continue increasing. And I'll get into that in just a minute, but 14% if we don't pass the TEP, and 12% if we do pass the TEP. Now let's look at these other modes, and then I'll get back to that drive-alone number. So for shared rides, or as you know them, carpools, it's a little bit unintuitive here. Without the TEP, it will grow by 22%, which is good. With the TEP, it'll only grow by 20%. That's also good. The reason you're not seeing a higher growth with the TEP is that in general, carpools are decreasing. They've been decreasing since 1980, and that's a documented fact. But we do know that those folks who are no longer carpooling are going to other modes, mostly transit. So transit ridership would see a 16% increase were we to not pass the TEP, but with the TEP, you'll see a doubling to 31%. So that's a good thing. And just so you know, the red numbers indicate, not so positive benefits, whereas the green represent positive benefits. But we wanted to apply a color because sometimes a negative number can be a positive thing and a positive number can be a negative thing. So on bicycle use, without the TEP, we'd see a good increase of 80%, but with the TEP and the build out of the low stress network, which you may remember from the bike and pedestrian plan, it's $1 billion investment, and we'd see a 245% increase in the number of cyclists. So that's a good thing. And so back to that drive alone number. So between 2020 and 2040, we're adding 228,000 new commute trips each day. 228,000. So out of those new trips, 35% of those new trips are on transit or shared vehicles. 43% of those new trips are on transit, shared vehicles, or bicycles, so non-single occupant vehicle. 57% of those new trips are in single occupant vehicle, but that's compared to the around 80% of single occupant drivers we have during the commute today. So we're seeing a big shift. Now we get into the environmental aspects, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gas emissions. So for VMT per capita, which is the metric that most people are looking at these days, it's what's looked at in CEQA with the change under SB 743, without the TEP, and this is where we've been able to look out to 2055. Without the TEP, we will see a 3% decrease in daily VMT. With the TEP, you'll see a greater than 15% decrease in VMT. And we say greater than because we've got it greater than 15%. Some of our information is showing it as high as around 16%, but we wanted to round down from the 15.2% that we had in the final table. And that does correspond with the decreases that are mandated under SB 743. For greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, without the TEP, we'll see a 47% decrease in emissions. Those are mainly due to the Pavley bill and the turnover of the electric vehicle fleet. With the TEP, we see an even greater decrease to 55% per capita in reduction in greenhouse emissions. And we think those benefits will continue to climb or reduce throughout time. So that's another good thing. And here's a chart we put together showing VMT through year 2055. The bluish thick line on the left is the trend starting in 2010. The green line shows if that trend were to continue unabated. The red line shows no TEP, and then the purple line at the bottom is showing with passage of the TEP, the reductions you'll see by 2055. And that difference there between the red and the purple is that 15% that we just showed. So now we're on to next steps. So what we plan to do beyond this is to continue working on the model, continue processing the 57% of the TEP that is difficult to quantify through the model. And those are those programs and policies that are a big portion of the TEP. Things that we haven't been able to even, and probably won't even be able to attempt to quantify, are the safety aspects, the seamless connected transportation. Those things just don't show up in the model or even in post-processing. The modernization of the old bores of the Caldecott. Those are things we're not going to be able to quantify, but they're safety related and will have a positive impact on the users of those facilities. And we will continue to work with the Bay Area Council on their economic analysis. They use a different model than us. And what it will tell us is, the dollar amounts that are expected to be generated through passage of the TEP, including jobs created by passage of the TEP. They're going to look at benefits by corridor. So what's happening on the 680 corridor, what's happening on the 80 corridor, the 4 corridor, and so forth. And then really providing those user-based outcomes that people really understand, the voters understand. So that's what we plan to do over the next few months, and we'll be coming back to you to share those results. Martin and I can now take your questions.
Let me ask you, because key people have just come back in the room, let me ask you to go back to the mode shift slide, that one. And those are pretty impressive numbers for percentages. Do we have hard numbers that are associated with those? Because, I mean, if I have a group of 1, 100% increase goes to 2. So I'd kind of like to have an idea of order of magnitude of people or individuals or something that relate to that. There you go. Okay. And it's relative to the amount of money we're spending. So there are going to be people who are going to say, you're spending how much to get 7,000 people onto bikes instead of driving alone.
Yeah, these are people per day.
Right. And so these are shifts from drive alone to these other modes?
We would imagine that most of them are coming from drive alone due to the increased transit that we are planning around the county, as well as the bike infrastructure.
Right. So it's people going from drive alone to either carpooling or riding transit or hopping on a bike. And those might be people that have never driven alone, but we're finally training them and they have a way to get around. So a bike is okay and they can eschew the car altogether.
Right. There's now frequent transit service closer to their home. Exactly.
Okay, and think of all your other questions because I have one more. When you go back to a couple of slides before that, don't remember what we would call it, how do you explain the going from the 85% delay increase to the 23%? Yes, that one. How would you explain that to a group of citizens in a room? How are we accomplishing that?
Yep.
I mean, you can say the model does it and the program does it, but they're going to say, yeah, right.
So
how do we explain that?
I meant to mention a few factors that contributed to that, and there are a few major factors, and really it is the punching through of the HOV/express lane on 680 through the 24. Huge bottleneck that is, basically eliminated with that project. Also, the operational improvements on Highway 4. Those are two of our biggest bottlenecks, and they both those projects offer, huge improvements for vehicular travel.
Okay, so that's primarily bottleneck relief by making continuous lanes and getting things so that it operates more smoothly.
Exactly.
Okay. Questions from others? Dave?
Yeah, can you go back to the bicycle slide? Is this just Contra Costa County?
Yes.
What did you do? Because I have to tell you, the numbers, when you got to the actual numbers, looked low from what I saw at Dublin BART today. And I don't know where we're going to put all these bikes if you go to 245%. There are already hundreds parked there. Does it take and the ride sharing, for the most part, isn't here. It's on the other peninsula and all there's some. When you see big numbers like that, you have to start thinking do we have the infrastructure and the other stuff for this? But this is just counting Contra Costa, 2 or 3 BART stations and extrapolating, interpolating, whatever?
Basically, it's looking at building out the low stress network of protected bikeways around the county going where people want to go, getting them to transit. When you build those types of facilities, you get those users who
They
wouldn't
come?
normally.
That's been used. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, and I mean, right now they could use, they could ride down Treat Boulevard if they wanted to, but they're not going to. But if you put a protected facility along there, you'll get young people, you'll get all ages using that
Thank you.
facility.
Yeah, safe bike lanes is a big deal. So, Newell.
Well, first of all, this is fascinating to see. We've all been waiting for this. Just like the one slide that you had where you break out by actual counts, I think the board would probably like to see all of that. What was the rate of population increase you use? Is it 1.2% a year? What are those projections? So it helps us as we talk to people, and also understanding and making sure the concepts we put forward are going to achieve what we believe the goals would be as well. So is that something you guys put together in a fairly simple format?
Yeah, we've got a lot of data associated with this, but we can work with Lindsay and the team to put together a fact sheet of some sort.
Fact sheet that breaks out, drive alone. So what's the real numbers you had in that? And then obviously this is just 20 years out. So what are we looking at in terms of, some of your numbers are out to 2055, and so how are we going to present this information then?
Yeah, those will
I'm
be
sorry,
helpful.
that was a question. Are we going to present it both just as 20 to 2040 and on some numbers to 2055, or are we going to compare midpoint to end?
So the model, when it comes to forecasting the different modes, there's a lot that goes into that, and we didn't feel comfortable doing that beyond the model's
20 years.
horizon.
Okay.
With the greenhouse gas and the VMT, we kind of did some projections off model that we felt more comfortable with, because those things grow more linearly.
Right.
Whereas these things change with every project you put in the model.
Okay.
And,
Fair enough. No, and that's a good explanation too.
And that's largely because the MTC model only goes to 2040 right now. As we get further down the line, we will be able, and MTC updates it to 2050, then we'll be able to go to 2050.
This is a really good start. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Karen.
2 points. I would suggest this slide be updated. Instead of having 2 slides, put slashes and then put the real number there, because I think Julie and others have brought up a really good point. It's great, 80% versus 245, but because you didn't show us that other slide until we asked, and that slide to me says more than this one. So but going back to both Julie and Newell, you all read the paper today. I'm wondering, is there any way to make this more relevant to the voter? Like in 5 years, I'm going to see X, or 10 years, I'm going to see Y. 20 years out, you know how I say this, folks, and Randy just said he was getting older.
I won't be driving.
Well, my point is,
You don't want me to.
we want to have information that says there's a reason I need to vote for this now, because I'm going to see relief in 5 years. I'm not going to be here in 20 years or 35 years, and that's all great and fine, but if I'm going to vote for this, based on what I read and what I'm hearing, people want to see results now. And I don't know if you can do that modeling or if you can extrapolate backwards or do something, but I really think it's important, if we can, to try and present, what you're going to see in 2025. And if that's too soon, I get it, but at least 2030.
Well, what's the horizon for building out the express lane from county line to county line? And maybe that gets us a piece of it.
Maybe. I just think we've got to make the time frame more relevant to the voter.
Okay,
Or pick those things that will occur along there. It may not be the whole plan, but there are things they're going to highlight that may be very valuable.
right.
Right.
Randy?
If we could wrap this around the completion of capital projects.
Right.
When we finish this project, this is what you can expect to see. When we finish this project, this is what you can expect to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Randy?
So commissioners, you're right on point. So what the model assumes, we asked Matt to take a look at this, is assuming we deliver capital projects that are going to reduce congestion on the same schedule that we delivered it for Measure J. So if you look at the last 10 years, we have delivered 85% of all the major construction projects. So part of what I said tonight is we're starting Innovate 680. So you've got all the consultants in a room. Tim and Susan and Stephanie and Hisham are starting to manage that with our consultants, the schedule to deliver that program in the next less than decade. So that's the idea. And so if the funding works out right, and once again, past performance has no indication of future performance. However, the goal is to, within the next 15 years, is to deliver the capital program. That's what started this process, because the capital program in Measure J was exhausted in a few years. And so we want to do that, assuming we still have bonding capacity and allow it to bond against 43% of them, or whatever that number is of the measure.
Well, and then, you say, should this pass, we will bond as we have in the past, and even though these numbers are 20 years out, this is when we think it will be finished, and this is the impact you will see at that time.
Yeah, the incremental phasing in of the impact. I think that would be a powerful message for people, especially some of our older voters who might be a little more conservative. So,
Good point.
all right. Other questions? Good report. We're looking forward to seeing more detail. We're a little nerdy that way. Awesome. All right. The next item.
Could we should just thank Martin. This really is his last
It
presentation.
is.
So Martin,
Yay!
for everything.
We have a breakfast, I think, for him coming up pretty soon. So we'll talk about that toward the end of the meeting. Yeah. All right. So the next item on the agenda is the draft TEP, review of the status of cities and towns approval, et cetera, process going forward. And that's Tim.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tim Hale, Deputy Executive Director for Projects, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to have the pleasure to provide an update on where we're at in terms of our major milestone to seek support of the expenditure plan by the majority of the cities and the majority of the population. In your handout for 1.2, you have a schedule. It was also part of your packet as well, but the handout provides an update of the cities that the staff has provided presentations for and seek support. This schedule is also sorted by date. The one in your packet is sorted by city, alphabetically by city. This one's sorted by date, so you can kind of see, chronologically which cities we're going to be going to by date. And so the first city, which unanimously voted 5-0, was Hercules. And just a few notes, some comments was the Randy Iwasaki. He provided a detailed presentation of the expenditure plan at the mayor's conference a few weeks ago, and the city of Hercules found that to be very, very helpful. David Biggs, the city manager, outlined how the Measure J really supported the city's initiatives relative to Hercules Intermodal Station and other projects. And Chris Kelly did an outstanding job of just keeping the council apprised, and she also represents Chair WCTAC. And so just a huge thank you for the support. Clayton, there was a few individuals, one individual as part of Clayton. It was voted as 4-1, and one individual was not in favor of taxes. And I can maybe offer Commissioner Pierce if you want to add any additional comments. Okay.
He just doesn't want taxes. Thank you, Chris, for getting us off to the right starting, Hercules.
And the other one that I had the pleasure of presenting to Walnut Creek last night, and they were voted yes at 3-2. And similar to Clayton, there was a few individuals not in favor of taxes and voted no on the resolution. Interestingly enough, that Walnut Creek, they actually took the resolution and splitted the action into two actions. One action was to adopt the TEP at 4-1, and the other action was to be in support of placing the TEP on the ballot, and that was voted at 3-2. And I will offer Commissioner Haskew if you would like to add any additional comments.
I want to thank the Bike East Bay representative for coming. First of all, it was a difficult meeting for a couple of reasons, but the public comment, the unsolicited public comment, really helped. I think there was more people on the fence than the vote would indicate, and I think that public comment made a huge difference. So it was worth their effort to come out and really physically support the measure.
Newell?
I was just going to suggest, and appreciate we're all trying to help our jurisdictions understand, because we've been so deeply involved in those for so long. I think all that's important for us to say, and not give details of who did what or why, the message is, did it pass or not? And I would leave it at that, because we don't all agree about everything, even here sometimes. But the fact is what we're after is the net result, majority rules, and we all as elected realize that we may have some reason we might not agree. But once the decision's made, we're behind it, because that's the decision of that body.
That's right.
So I would suggest in the future that all we focus on, either it passed or it didn't. And if it didn't pass, then we want to know why. But if it passed, let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
That's a suggestion.
Thank you. Kevin?
And just a quick reminder, as we're presenting to council, we need to remind those council members that whether or not you vote on this item, it is not necessarily supporting the tax increase. You're just providing your residents the opportunity to have that vote.
That's right.
And by taking that away from them, you're taking that opportunity by voting against it and possibly shutting it down. You're taking that opportunity away from the voters, your own public, to make that decision on their own, and that's not what our role is as council members.
Exactly. That's a very important point that needs to be made during the presentations, is that the decision before our councils is whether to allow our residents to vote on this measure. And then if individual council members want to vote differently, that's fine, but this is allowing our citizens the opportunity to decide. So, very good. We've got a bunch more scheduled, and we're going to pick up a head of steam here. But so far, we're 3-0. That's good. That's good. Hercules, they were first out of the gate. And Chris, thank you for leading that. That's terrific. All righty. If there's nothing else on that item, then 1.3 is next steps toward adopting the proposed TEP. Tim?
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you. This is really an administrative, very important administrative item. And this is really looking towards what's going to happen over the next several meetings and looking into the future in terms of the schedule and the process to adopt the TEP, to impose a transaction and use tax ordinance, as well as requesting the County Board of Supervisors to call and consolidate the election. This has been the roadmap that we've been using since April of this year, and happy to report, in collaboration and the support of this board, we've been staying right on track, on schedule. In front of you is the September 4th version of the Transportation Expenditure Plan. We wanted to make sure that the authority had nice, clean hard copies of the expenditure plan that has been authorized and circulated to the cities and towns for consideration support. And that was done at the August 28th meeting. And so we are, as you know, just as the last item, going around to the cities and counties. Next big milestone is meeting October 30th to take action on some of the items that I'll be discussing in this presentation, and then moving that towards the County Board of Supervisors on November 12th to initially hear the request to call and consolidate the election, and then taking action on that on November 19th. So the first step is an ordinance adopting the 2020 TEP, and in that ordinance is essentially the process to have ordinance amendments, as well as and also amendments to the actual transportation expenditure plan. And so the amendments to the transportation expenditure plan is outlined in the TEP in Article 4, the Taxpayer Safeguard and Accountability Guidelines, as well as in the ordinance. And the attachments to this is the actual transportation expenditure plan, which is in front of you, and and if we get all of the majority of the cities, majority of the population, then this expenditure plan will be attached to that ordinance and be considered as final, as well as the spreadsheet, which is also in your handout. So a few of the regional transportation planning committees, the spreadsheet is important to the RTPCs in terms of how we're going to maintain sub-regional equity throughout the implementation of the measure. And that spreadsheet is actually not attached to the TEP, but will be adopted and attached to this ordinance. And so the reason for that is if something needs to happen relative to that spreadsheet in terms of moving dollars around based on an action or decision that's made by an RTPC, it could be done through an ordinance amendment and not necessarily a full TEP amendment. And so so it's intended to be like that way in terms of help to streamline the administration and implementation of the TEP. And that's described in the ordinance. The ordinance amendments is basically by a process that requests collaboration with the RTPCs. And so if we did have to change something like the table or the TEP, we would make sure we have active coordination with the RTPCs and Public Oversight Committee. And then just as a reminder, if we do revise the TEP, any revision that's $50 million or less would only require administrative 45-day period of comment, and $50 million or greater would actually require a series of meetings that the authority board would have to hold, and also make sure that we give a 90-day public comment period. And so I just want to remind that's outlined in both the TEP and the ordinance. And so the next item in your packet is the transaction and use tax. And so this transaction and use tax is to impose a tax of a half percent. That would be the operative date would be July 1st of 2020, and the sunset date would be June 30th of 2055. And I'm going to allow General Counsel to provide you an overview of the transaction and use tax ordinance.
I'll be brief. We've been working with the State Department of Tax and Fee Administration. It used to be called the State Board of Equalization. They provided us sample documents. We've incorporated that language in the draft ordinance before you. They actually have to approve it before you approve it. So we've sent a draft of it for their review. If they have any additional comments, we'll incorporate that into the final document for your consideration. But most of the language in here is dictated from what they've requested be included in the ordinance.
Thank you, Mala. And the other item that we're discussing is the actual resolution requesting the Board of Supervisors to call and consolidate the election. So there's language and transformer language in there that says so. And then also what's important is something that we did a little different with this proposed measure rather than the 2016 Measure X is that we are proposing that we put the full TEP up on our website, and actually in the sample ballot and voter information handbook have a very succinct summary of the TEP, as well as that would also accompany the ballot language. And then that would be attached, the ballot summary that would go as well as the ballot language would be attached to the resolution of support that would go to the Board of Supervisors. We are planning on handing that out at a future meeting, and a request from staff is to allow staff to meet with the ad hoc committee to review the ballot language and the TEP summary, and then we could bring that forward as a handout at a future, or to bring that forward to the authority board for consideration at a future meeting, whether that be at the October 16th regular meeting or the October 30th special TEP meeting, where the authority board will be taking final action. The other attachment to the request for the resolution is the actual transaction and use tax ordinance. And so in order to adopt the transaction and use tax ordinance, we have to have adoption of the TEP and the support of the majority of the cities and the majority of the population in the county. And so those will be the two attachments to the resolution, and that will be take an action October 30th, and then it would be request the Board of Supervisors on November 12th to hear the initial call for the vote, and then take action on November 19th. So that concludes my report, and available to take questions.
All right, questions for Tim?
Sounds great.
Looks like we're moving right along, and so you propose that we will take action on all 4 of those items at the October 30th meeting.
Yes, that's correct. And so right now they're consolidated into one item, and when we bring this back to you on October 30th, they will actually be separated out into individual items, and we will be taking action individually in a sequence to make sure we do that per guidance from General Counsel.
Right. Okay. Any other questions on that? Comments? We're rolling right along. You guys are doing a great job of keeping this organized. So are there any public comments on this item? I don't see anyone rushing. You have correspondence and communications. If there are no other comments for the good of the order.
I do have
Yes.
just a
Newell.
point of order. Several of our next special meetings on October 16th, many of us, if you're going to the California League of Cities, there's policy committee meetings that are in the morning.
Right.
So I know I won't be here.
So we need
Are
to
there
check for a
others?
quorum.
Dave won't be here.
I'll be here. What? So Terry Ann will check for a quorum.
Yeah, just to be, unfortunately, that's been scheduled for a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you
So I
know,
just wanted to raise that.
the big actions are October 30th, so everybody has to be here. You can't have early Halloween, okay?
Got it.
Got to be here on the 30th. I'll be coming in late that night, but I'll be there. October 30th is when we're going to adopt all of these items here. But we do have a meeting scheduled for October 16th, which is the night before the league meetings.
What time? On the
No,
On
third?
October 30th,
In the
6
evening?
o'clock.
Yeah.
Same as all of our meetings.
I'm going to the Cal LAFCO annual whatever.
Well, you got to have your alternate here then.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Okay? Yes.
I heard the report was that October 30th is the important date for all of us to be here. Then the issue will come to the Board of Supervisors on November 12th. Did I then hear something, there's one more meeting after that? Is
Yeah,
that-
you have it in 2 hearings. You have 2 meetings at the board to get it done.
Oh, okay, so the second one is normally on consent. Does that have?
I don't know how that process works. I just know it's on 2 agendas.
Okay, so it's not an authority meeting on the 19th. It's just the Board of Supervisors have a meeting on the 19th.
Correct.
I do believe that's usually consent, but we'll see. However it has to be, we will do it.
Right. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Tom, do you have anything else? Your light's on.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay. All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you. To our next special meeting on October 16th.